As exciting as it is to write your first book, there is a lot of anxiety that comes along with that excitement. Namely, I know that every first-time author, every second, third-time author also wants to make sure that their book is a huge success. But one of the things that makes that so difficult is the lack of understanding of what success even means in the book industry. And that's why today I want to kick off our 4-part series on book sales by talking about what makes a book a success. Stay tuned. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. Unless you are a subscriber either to our newsletter, to this YouTube channel, to our podcast, you are probably here because you want me to talk about how you can sell more books. And you are in luck because this episode, as I mentioned in the teaser, is the first episode in a 4-part series on book sales. And in this series, what I really want to do is kind of dig down deep into the things that really move the needle. So let's start by talking a little bit about what I want to accomplish in this series, what you can expect to get out of it. But then, of course, we are going to get into this kind of question of success, how we think about success, and of course, how we get to success as we move through this video. Okay, but first I really want to talk a little bit about what I'm thinking about and how I like to think about this kind of thing. Now, of course, as the founder and owner of a memoir-focused publishing company, I not only talk with authors all the time about how they can make their books successful, but I also have an ear to the industry. I'm also hearing things from other publishers, from agents, from other editors, and of course from authors about how things look on the actual ground. So as we dove into this series, as we were kind of thinking about what we wanted to talk about in this series, my team and I were really kind of brainstorming the things that we see over and over and over that come up when folks make the transition from the creativity of the writing, revising, and editing into the industry perspective, this very kind of production-focused perspective of the sales piece. And I've talked on this channel before about how separate those things can feel, about how difficult it is to transition from the creative piece into the sales piece. So my heart goes out if you are in that place. It is a really, really hard transition. You're gonna get there. I'm gonna give you some tips. But my heart goes out because that is a really difficult transition. And one way that I saw this show up pretty recently that's going to lay the groundwork for the talk that we're going to have today and in the next 4 weeks is that I attended an Authors Guild workshop. Now, this workshop, I was kind of going just to be a fly on the wall, kind of see how stuff was talked about. But it was specifically for authors who were looking to market their books. And in fact, the presenter was a marketing expert. She had worked on many, many, many books. And as she went through her presentation and the eventual Q&A, of course, one thing that I really started to see as a trend from the audience was a real push for this presenter to define what a successful book launch is. Now, of course, the presenter kept referring to a successful book launch, so it is fair to expect that they would define it. But at the same time, this presenter was really not wanting to define numbers of a successful book launch because, of course, it's going to depend on your type of book, on the type of authorship. Is this your first or, fifth book? Do you have a big platform? There are tons and tons of unknowns that are going to get in the way of really defining this for people. And yet, folks were really pushing her. Folks were really, really wanting this kind of numerical return on investment ROI way of thinking about a successful book launch. And the more I listened, the more I thought there is so much more going on here than what meets the eye. I knew that we had to kick off this series with a video addressing specifically this question of, how do I even know if I have a successful book launch? If I follow the tips that people are giving me on successful book launches, what can I expect? So let's dive into it, because the first thing that I want to talk about is the kind of major overarching problem that I see as people are heading from that creative piece into the productive piece and kind of trying to tackle head on kind of what their expectations might be. Of course, we want to make sure that we are kind of protecting our heart from any major disappointments. And at the same time, we're so excited, right? Because the book is going out into the world. So I want to speak to that moment, and I want to speak to the problem that I often see come up. Now, let me kind of give a little metaphor here, because I think it's going to really serve us later. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but there are some fascinating studies on just kind of the human psychology of navigating new places. And one of my favorite studies on this topic is a study in which they will drop an individual person into a big open space. So like, you think of like a desert, or even sometimes it can be a forest where it's just kind of trees everywhere, but it's a big space. Now, one thing that's really necessary in this experiment is there won't be any landmarks, right? So we do not have trail markers. We do not have road signs. Usually we won't even have any kind of particular looking rocks or trees or flowers. There are no landmarks. And what the instructions are that are given to that person is walk in a straight line in that direction. Now, I find this study so interesting because, of course, all of us think that we could walk in a straight line. Of course, who couldn't do that? But what actually happens in this experiment is that people will list just a little bit to the left as they walk. And what happens is they are eventually moving in a big circle. And this is so consistent that it is effectively a law of human psychology when it comes to navigating new places. Now, what can stop this kind of circle, what can stop us from moving in a circle, is that we can have a landmark that actually allows us to track the way we're moving, right? So if we do this same experiment, but rather than making sure that there's not a landmark in sight, we plant a flag and tell the person, walk toward this flag. Well, of course, we could all do that, right? That isn't even a tricky thing to do. It's a very natural thing. And the reason I wanted to share this bit of human psychology is that it relates so much to book sales, so much to whether your launch is successful, and particularly whether you see your book launch as successful. And the thing is, if we were able to put that flag at the point that we are headed to, we can move there so much more easily. We can determine whether we're off track, right? Oh, I thought that flag was right in front of me. Now I see it's just a little to my right. Let me adjust. We have so much more control, so much more certainty in the process when we actually plant that flag. So what does this have to do with book sales? The problem in a successful launch for most authors that I see is that there is no definition of what success would look like. There is no planting of the flag. So what happens is that we list left until we're just walking in a circle. And this is a really, really big issue because, as you no doubt know from the space that you are in, as we're working through the process of writing, editing, publishing, and marketing a book, we are very often dealing with many, many things outside of us, right? Our lives can get busy. Our work lives can change. We have obligations to our friends and our family. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And when we don't have that flag planted, we are so likely to not even notice that we have started to veer off track, that we are starting to head into different territory and ignore that goal that we set for ourselves. Okay, so because we do not plant that flag, we are not able to walk in a straight line, even anything resembling a straight line, toward it. And that's a really big problem when we're thinking about whether our book launch will be successful. But there's also an underlying problem, and I want to dig down in there because I do want to get to the root of this. When we think about why people are so hesitant to plant that flag, the answer is almost always self-doubt. Now, let me tell you what this sounds like in my experience. So as I mentioned, I am the owner and founder of a memoir-focused publishing company. So I have a lot of this type of conversation with authors. And there's a pretty particular route that this will tend to take when this problem is kind of cooking up, when it's in the making. And that is that when I ask what people want their book to do for them, what do they want to get out of writing this book? very, very often, the thing that people will say is that they want to help other people. They want to make sure that people feel seen and heard. They want to spread their message. And all those things are so important. In fact, I will not accept a book to be published by our company to be added to our list effectively unless those goals are at least apparent in the work. Those are really, really, really important. And without the goal to actually reach and help your reader, you will not be successful. So do not hear me say that those are not good goals. I'm saying the opposite. They are great. But as a publisher of Memoir, I also want to know when I chat with people whether they are setting themselves up to hit some kind of other success that they just don't want to share with me. And oftentimes, when I push on that button a little bit, what I find is a whole mess of self-doubt, right? Whenever we push for a number to be placed on what success would look like for us, we start to really collapse in on ourselves. There's a lot of anxiety. We're just plain scared. So what is going on there? Oftentimes, just as we have a battle between the creative and the industry, between expressing ourselves and making something new and exciting, and selling that thing, just as we have a battle there, there is so often a battle between our big, audacious dreams and our self-doubt. And what happens is when we are pushed to put a number on what kind of success we want, we shy away, right? What if I tell you I want to sell 1 million copies and then I only sell 250,000? Well, would that be embarrassing? No, but I understand feeling like it would be. And this is the thing that holds so many people back, not just from sharing their dreams with me or other publishers or other folks they're speaking with, but also from even defining those dreams in the first place. Just as we don't want to be, feel embarrassed or ashamed around others, we certainly do not want to disappoint ourselves that way. And what that means is we don't end up with any kind of a clear roadmap for where we're headed. That is a really big problem. Okay, well, so where does this come from though? Because self-doubt, it is easy to blame almost everything on self-doubt because many, many things are the fault of self-doubt. But there's more happening here, and I want to go into actually 2 different causes. So the first one, as I have hinted at, is that very often we have some fear inside of ourselves, right? Some kind of doubt whether we can do it or not, and that often just makes us not even want to define and certainly not share what our goals for success might be. And what this really boils down to is perfectionism. Now, I know many of y'all that listen to this channel are high achieving people. You are so used to being able to knock whatever you try to do out of the park. Usually the people that listen to this channel are really invested in learning, invested in education. You do want to make sure that you are putting an excellent book out there. And also, you want to make sure that if you put it out there, other people agree that it's excellent. I totally get it. The problem is that when we start thinking about whether something is excellent or terrible, we have now entered into this level of black and white thinking that is so specific to perfectionism and so difficult to shake. So when we think about perfectionism, we really are always thinking about it as a black and white thing, right? It needs to be perfect, hence perfectionism, or it's terrible. And the thing that perfectionism won't let us see is that there is a whole vast gulf between perfect and terrible, a whole gulf of things. And oftentimes, the thing that we really want is going to require us to be so authentic that it just cannot physically be perfect, right? But what happens is we're in the creative space. Very often this is where that kind of black and white perfectionism starts brewing. You're hearing, I know you are, that you should not be going back into your draft and editing until you're all the way done. So we kick that perfectionism can down the road and wait until we get to the sales point. It's totally understandable and it is totally unhelpful. So I'm going to give you some solutions in a second, but I want to get to the second cause because they really go together very, very neatly. And the second cause of this kind of hesitation or unwillingness to set an actual goal number is typically a lack of industry knowledge. This is totally understandable when you are a first-time author, and even if you have published traditionally a few times, it doesn't make you an industry insider. You are still not going to have access to the types of conversations that publishers have with one another, to the types of numbers that publishers have access to that the general public doesn't. All of these things that you would really need to have a clear framework for what is going to make your book successful or not successful. And because we don't have that industry knowledge, what so often happens is that we will try to pick it up, but from the reader's perspective. So let me say a little bit more about what I mean here. Now, all of us know that sometimes we will have our cell phones sitting out and we are having a conversation, and then all of a sudden we open up our cell phone and we've got a million social media ads for whatever it was we were just talking about. It's so very creepy, so very creepy. And because the book industry is still an industry, as much as we love it, they are often participating in many of the same types of activities, right? They are targeting audiences that match particular books, and then they were making sure that those audiences see those books as many times as possible. They are pumping these particular books out. And when you are the reader that is on the receiving end of that, it is very easy to think that, one, those are the only books that are out there, even though we know cognitively that there are other people interested in other topics that are no doubt seeing different books thrown at their face over and over again. So it makes us feel like that's the only book. Those are the only books. And two, because we tend to assume that everyone is seeing those same 5 books in their face every day, we tend to assume that those books are selling millions and billions of copies, that the success must be so big we can't even visualize it. Well, friends, I want to tell you that neither of those things are true. They are both things that your brain is telling you, and they're really, really unhelpful. Okay, so I want to go into the solution, and I'm going to start by getting rid of some of those industry misconceptions, because we do need to make sure that we are thinking logically and rationally. Okay, before we do that, I want to give you a little caveat. I haven't done a caveat in a while. And that is, when I tell you I want you to be logical and rational as you are setting your goals, do not hear me say you shouldn't aim big. That is not what I'm saying. And oftentimes when I tell people to really think about kind of what they want, what they're willing to give, what they hope the outcome will be, oftentimes there is this sense that I'm discouraging them from dreaming big. That is not what is happening here. I want you to have those big, audacious goals, and I want you to protect them from your self-doubt. And part of doing that is feeling really, really certain that the goal you've set is a reasonable and logically sound goal to have. So let me give you a little bit of a behind the scenes kind of peek, not into the numbers because those change so frequently, but into the kind of structural way that publishers will think about some of these questions. So I want to address those two same things that I just talked about. The first being that we assume everyone is seeing the same books we are, and the second one being that because we make that assumption, we assume that the sales numbers are humongous, in fact, like difficult to even comprehend. Okay, so the first of these is really, really easy to knock out of the park, and that is that the book industry does not plug just one book for everyone. And in fact, I pretty recently gave a talk for the kind of industry behemoth, Readsy, and one of the things they'd asked me to comment on was the state of the memoir market. So I did some digging. I kind of asked around, talked to some folks that are in my circle, and also did some research into Publishers Marketplace. That's where the big deals are announced, as well as some of the BookScan data. That's where the sales numbers are reported. And in the memoir market specifically, there is a real trend toward the niche. And what I mean by this is that while it used to be that we kind of thought about celebrity memoirs as separate from everybody else's memoir, what is now happening is that publishers are kind of cluing into the fact that there is huge power in a niche following. So we are seeing what we might call micro celebrities, but oftentimes no one would call these folks celebrities. And yet they speak to a very particular audience so well that they are able to sell those books, spread that message, get that word of mouth we all want. But you know what? These kinds of niche micro celebrity types of authors, They are not shown to everyone. They just aren't. That is not the strategy. The strategy is to niche down. And I will tell you what, this is not going anywhere. Because where I believe that this has come from, based on my experience talking with others, I believe that this has come quite literally from our new ability to target readers so specifically with social media data, with ad data, with the kind of specificity of running ads kind of across platforms. One thing we can really do is dial in and only spend the money to reach the particular readers we know will be invested. Well, guess what? If you are a micro celebrity, if you have, no matter how small, a niche of really engaged people, you're gold. The publisher knows exactly who to target. So while we used to, and we still do, we used to really feel like the gold standard was that email list, that you have a list of people that have raised their hand and said, yes, send me stuff. We're now seeing that show up in different ways when people have thought about the niche. So the next time you get one of these targeted book ads, I want you to really consciously tell yourself, remind yourself that that is a targeted book ad. That is not the ad for a book that everyone in the world is seeing. You are seeing it because it matches your interest, and the publisher has enough data to realize that that is the case. Okay, so that's the first thing, is this kind of niche versus everyone framing. That's really, really important. The second is, because we assume that everyone is seeing the same ads that we are, the same kind of promotions that we are, we will assume that those 5, maybe, books are selling all of the copies of all of the books in the world. And this is not true either. Now, of course, there are household name books, there are New York Times bestseller books that most everybody knows, right? They're kind of buzzing around the population. This, by the way, is really difficult to decipher at this time because oftentimes your friends are probably getting the same targeted ads. But be that as it may, we do still have household names and bestsellers. That is still a thing. The problem is, when we are in this perfectionistic black and white mindset, it is so easy for us to assume that you are either a household name and a bestseller, or you did a terrible job and that book was a failure and everyone is disappointed in you. Well, of course, we all know there is a huge difference between those two poles, right? And in fact, one thing that I will often hear people kind of talk about differently before they're in the industry versus after is the idea of what's called Midlist. Now, I did a video on misunderstood publishing terms a couple of months ago, so if Midlist is not something you've heard and you're interested in it, go back and check out that video. But what I want to say about Midlist for now is that Midlist is a very particular type of book that publishers actually really love. Now, Midlist is sort of placed in opposition to a couple of other terms. The first being the front list. These are the books that are coming out. They are in the catalogs. They're the ones that are being really, really pushed. And then backlist. And backlist are books that are still available, but they are not really being engaged in any way by the publisher. Sometimes they'll also go out of print, but for our purposes, we'll say that these are books that are not really being invested in. Midlist are the books that publishers know are the tried and true sellers, that they do not have a 6-month lifespan. They are going to keep selling for years. The Midlist books are the tried and true. They are the absolute pillars of the publishing industry. And yet, I will very often hear this term Midlist talked about in a really derogatory way. In fact, I just watched a movie last night in which one of the main characters said he didn't want to be a Midlist failure. And I lost it. I cracked up. If you are Midlist, you are not a failure. Oh my gosh, that is a dreamy place to be. My point here is, while it is so easy to assume that your choices are household name, New York Times bestseller, or utter failure, the good news and the bad news is you're not likely to hit either of those. Most people don't. The really good news is that you might not even want to be in those places anyway. In my opinion, the best way that you can make both an impact in your messaging and an impact in your career is to aim for that midlist. Aim for a book that is so true and real that people will want to read it for years, that it will not have an expiration date. That is the best thing that you can want. So the next time that you feel yourself kind of sucked into this kind of target marketing and the way it can mess with our brain, just want you to remind yourself that that's what's happening. I bet you already do it actually with other types of products. Books are kind of special in that way, as I think we often don't notice it, but I want you to remind yourself, this is just advertising. You are being advertised to. We know that the truth is much, much more complicated than any black or white duality could possibly communicate. Okay, so that's the first solution, and I really do want you to really be thinking about the book industry is just an industry. It is not sort of this glitz and glam. It's just like any other industry. We want to welcome you into it, and part of that is really just understanding that the industry is any other industry. It's actually not quite as exciting as most people think. Okay, so the first solution, be really realistic with yourself about kind of the industry, how it's being targeted to you, and how that's making you think of the industry in ways that are maybe not true. The second thing, you saw this coming from the very beginning of this video, is I want you to actually write out what a successful book launch would be for you. Now, I do not want you to have self-doubt here. I want you to be so bold with what you write down. You don't have to show it to anybody else, but I want you to boldly write down what you want from this book launch. So what is that? What is the number that you want? What is the amount of money that you want to make? What is the number of copies that you want to sell? What are the number of appearances you want to make? What are some of these pieces that go into your successful book launch? Remember, until we plant that flag, we don't know where we're heading. So it's going to be really, really difficult to make a lot of decisions that way. Instead, when you can concretely write down what it is you're going for, you will be so much better equipped, not only to get guidance from people like me on how to get to that goal, but also on the types of questions that you even need to ask, right? If you come to me and say, I want to sell 100 books, I'm going to have really different advice than if you come to me and say you want to sell 1,000,000. So having this all detailed out is going to be so helpful as you move forward, not only for your mindset, but for just literally helping you navigate this new industry. Okay, the third thing I want you to do is as you are making that very clearly defined list of what types of outcomes you want, I want you to make sure that you include some of these numerical things, some of these sort of external types of things that you want. And I want you to include some of the things that maybe we don't always think about, but that actually can feel just as vulnerable to allow yourself to imagine. So what kinds of things would that be? Oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, folks really want to help others. Someone shared with me the other day that their goal in that sort of area was to help others feel that they had been seen. And I love that. I love that. What an important and just a special thing to be able to do for someone else. I think that is an amazing, amazing goal. You might be somebody that wants to teach something. Maybe you have seen things go badly either in your own life or perhaps with people that you work with or know, and you feel like telling the story and kind of sharing some of your wisdom can really help someone navigate. They can learn from you and then navigate that situation with so much more ease and grace. That is an amazing goal too. And lastly, one that I want to make sure I point out because it is so dear to my heart, maybe one of your goals for your book is that you are going to raise an issue of injustice that is not being talked about. This is, by the way, not only one of the goals that is at the heart of all that Page and Podium does, but also something that is really, really helpful for getting that midlist sales. When you are drawing out kind of frameworks, language, ways of thinking about injustices that you yourself have either experienced or witnessed, and you are sharing that with people who either are just at the margins of that experience or don't know anything about it at all, that is a powerful, powerful contribution. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to also list all of those sort of more intangible, maybe kind of softer goals that you have, along with the goals that kind of feel scary because they are tangible, they're numbers. Get all of that down, and I want you to revisit it. You do not have to show it to other people, but you should have it with you so that you can look, remind yourself of what you're doing, remind yourself of why you are doing it. Also very important. And then the last thing that I want you to do is I want you to really get your feet on the ground in this industry that you're wanting to enter. The same way you would if you were interviewing for a job with a company in a new industry. I want you to dive right in. So the easiest way to do this is to go into your local bookstore. Alternatively, Amazon or any of its many amazing competitors will work. But I want you to go into a bookstore of some type, and I want you to look at the memoirs. And what I want you to do is I want you to find 5 to 10 that you had not heard of, but that are excellent books. Now, this is going to take you some reading, right? You're going to have to read them to decide whether you like them or not, of course. But the good thing about this is it's going to give you such a sense of community, of the other people that are out there who we would think of as normal people, right? That is a normal person. Not the people that are on Oprah every other week, not the people that have millions and millions of followers on their podcast. Normal people, people who have something really important to say, who are building this either new kind of side gig or a career or even just a platform to talk about the things that are important. You're that person, and so are these people. So are most authors. And when you can create that connection, when you can see yourself as someone who has achieved this goal, that is so powerful. So I want you to get out there and I want you to start looking at some of these mid-list books. I want you to start looking at some of the books that aren't being targeted to every single person, that maybe even aren't on the New York Times bestseller list, because there are so many amazing, powerful books that are moving many people into action that you've probably never heard of. So let's get out there. Let's really give our brain something to work with as we're moving forward through this very daunting, very exhausting journey. You are going to make it through this process. I know you are. And in the end, you will know so much more about this industry that you have set out to become a part of. And in fact, tune in next week, so make sure that you subscribe to this channel either on YouTube or on our podcast, however you're listening now, because next week we're going to talk about all of the misconceptions about how to sell books. This is going to be an inside deep dive into the memoir industry, and I know you're not going to want to miss it. So tune in next week. In the meantime, get started on that goal sheet. Plant your flag, because I can't wait to see your book come out. In the meantime, happy writing. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.